Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. Will be conducting our commentary during the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Our editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast this morning. Our photographer, Adam Bernstein, out and about preparing to track the Falcon 9 rocket once it does leave the pad. Do some still photography as well. Our other photographer, Michael Kane, has the morning off, but you can find both of their work over on X. Their handles: Michael is at MD Kane Jr., Adam is at Aburn NYC. While you're there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find us over on Threads as well as Facebook and Blue Sky. We'll also be joined in tracking assistance with this Falcon flight by our friend Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions, just a hair after liftoff. Currently T-minus 57 minutes, 37 seconds, and counting to what is set to be SpaceX's 120th Falcon 9 rocket to lift off in 2024 so far. As we get things going this morning, I want to thank the roughly 500 of you who are joining with us live this morning. I know it's an odd hour for those of us here in the United States, so certainly appreciate our audience here in the lower 48. And to our global audience, welcome to all of you. Hopefully it's a much more reasonable hour for live launch coverage in your neck of the woods. So taking a live look right now over at Space Launch Complex 40, Slick 40, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We are T-minus 56 minutes, 47 seconds, and counting. Mission on tap today, Starlink Group 6-70. We'll send up a batch of 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. This mission, the 84th Starlink flight of 2024. With this launch, SpaceX will have sent up a total of 1,855 Starlink satellites this year alone. It's closing in on the total number of Starlinks launched in 2023, which was 1,962. Granted, part of 2023 included the launches of the version 1.5 Starlink satellites, which were notably smaller and lighter than the version or the V2 mini Starlinks. So while the numbers are somewhat comparable, there is obviously the note that SpaceX has launched fewer of them per mission with the V2 mini variety, but has launched more often in 2024 than last year. Coming into this launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast things to be just about as good as it gets here for a Space Coast mission. Taking a look at some of the various pieces of weather data we have. Meteorologists forecast a greater than 95% chance of favorable weather at liftoff today. You see the clouds keeping pretty well offshore today. No cumulus clouds or thick clouds to speak of as potential weather concerns for this particular flight. No additional risk criteria. The liftoff winds trending between 15 and 20 miles per hour per meteorologist's forecast. If for whatever reason SpaceX needs to pivot to a 24-hour backup opportunity tomorrow, the weather looks roughly the same. If anything, the liftoff winds diminish even more so than they are today. So an even better outlook should SpaceX need to pause and turn around to that backup opportunity. Current T0 liftoff time for this Falcon 9 rocket is 5:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 10:13 UTC. The window for this launch extends out to 7:11 a.m. Eastern. 24-hour backup if they need it, as launch opportunities beginning at 5:37 a.m. Eastern. For those keeping up with Spaceflight, as I'm sure all of you are, being that you're here at 4:19 a.m. Eastern on a Wednesday morning, you'll note that it is quite a busy time in orbital spaceflight this week, and in particular today. We've already seen within the last several hours a launch from China, a Kuaizhou 1A rocket that lifted off with a synthetic aperture radar satellite. We've, of course, got this Starlink mission getting ready to lift off in 53 minutes and counting. And just about 10-ish minutes before this rocket is ready to lift off, the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, will begin their live launch coverage ahead of the launch of their PSLV XL rocket, supporting the European Space Agency's Proba 3 mission, a pair of precision flying tandem spacecraft that will be used to simulate total solar eclipses on orbit. That'll be followed later in the day by the launch of the Vega C rocket from French Guiana with the Sentinel-1C Earth observation spacecraft, marking the return to flight mission for that rocket. And then later on today, we're also looking at potentially, if things stay on track, the launch of Starlink 9-14 from over on the West Coast. So lots to pay attention to, lots to track, and we are certainly appreciative that you are here with us at Spaceflight Now for just one small piece of the orbital launch pie. And in that regard of thanks, I want to thank our wonderful moderators, Callisto Lee and Aussie Space Girl, for being with us this morning, helping to keep things kosher in the live chat. We are, of course, powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to folks like Clever Girl, Cumulus Granatus, Justin Mead, Bubba Ray, Skate Letter, and many others. KH, Patty Chichil, hello to you all. Raymar. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our member-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch our live launch liftoff moments here at the Cape in 4K. Last bit of housekeeping: if you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of spaceflight, or you just want to offer a little bit of support this morning, you could use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will it be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on through the count, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is always greatly appreciated. Now currently T-minus 15 minutes, 19 seconds and counting, as you get ready to see some of the milestones ticked off ahead of liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket this morning. Let's go ahead and step through our countdown timeline, let you know what we are anticipating in a nominal countdown timeline scenario. Of course, things will get rolling right around the T-minus 38 minute mark. That's when the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of propellant load. SpaceX takes their pull electronically, so they are in a good position to do so. They can take that pull a little bit ahead of the 38-minute mark, but broadly speaking, that is when it happens. Once the go-ahead for fueling is given, then prop load begins at T-minus 35 minutes. The loading of RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket, and liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, they start loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. The helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. They will do the same on the second stage about 4 or so minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes, loading of RP-1 on the second stage wraps up. And T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill-down process begins. It's when SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. We see it visually manifest by the so-called big vent that comes up at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. That venting lasts until T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up second stage lock slow to begin at the 16-minute mark. T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, and it helps protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence get underway. That's when the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, the strong back, reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. T-minus 3 minutes is when the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. LOX tank on the second stage tops off at the 2-minute mark. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch at 45 seconds out. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff, coming up once again at 5:13 a.m. Eastern. That is 10:13 UTC, or T-minus 46 minutes and 52 seconds. Now T-minus 46 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. Taking a look at the live chat. A couple of our channel members marking month anniversaries. Sulfur for Lunch, been with us for 4 months now, the mission specialist level. Appreciate that, Sulfur. It says a launch is a good way to start the day. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. One of our fabulous moderators, Aussie Space Girl, been with us as a member for 21 months now, coming up on the 2-year mark, saying best space launch channel around. Appreciate that, Stephanie. Thanks for all you do for us here at Spaceflight Now. Now T-minus 44 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. SpaceX continues its pace of launching on average every roughly 2 days. It's their goal for the remainder of the year. Trying to notch as many launches as possible and get through the majority of their manifest that they have still outstanding on the year. Taking a look at the bar chart as far as where they currently are for their Falcon family of rockets. So far, 121 as the count stands right now. 119 of those being Falcon 9 rockets, with 2 Falcon Heavy missions so far in 2024. That's where that number will stand, of course. There are no more Falcon Heavies on the docket. as we await the start of fueling and the go-ahead for that coming up here in just a handful of minutes. Let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon 9 rocket is going to be heading once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Falcon 9 rocket lifting off in support of the Starlink 6-70 mission, which means this Falcon is bound for a southeasterly trajectory once it leaves Space Launch Complex 40, or Slick 40, over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Falcon 9 first stage booster B-1067 will follow that red arc there. The drone ship landing bound for a ship called a shortfall of gravitas. If successful, this will mark the 88th booster landing on this particular drone ship and the 299th drone ship landing to date successfully. Also worth noting that the booster flying today, B-1067, going to be making its shortest turnaround so far in that booster's history at just 23 days with a successful liftoff this morning. Also noteworthy because B-1067 going into this mission was tied for the most number of launch liftoffs of the SpaceX fleet, but it will become the flight leader decidedly with this launch coming up here in 42 minutes and 3 seconds. No other booster from SpaceX has flown more than 23 times. B-1061 and 1062 did hit that 23 flight mark before they were both taken out of commission. SpaceX is, of course, continuing to work towards certifying its first stage boosters for up to 40 missions, and this is the next step towards that milestone. SpaceX also wanting to extend its payload fairings up to that 40 mission milestone as well, and so they will be doing their best to recover the payload fairings from this flight, turn them around and refurbish them for future missions. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, so as often as they are able to refly these fairing halves, it is in their financial interest to do so. Fairing halves will be recovered by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels and then brought back into Port Canaveral, where they will be turned around and refurbished for, again, those future flights. We're now at T-minus 40 minutes, 34 seconds and counting, just a couple of minutes away from the point at which SpaceX should nominally be making a decision on the start of prop load today. Now T minus 37 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should have made a call on the start of prop load by now. If that go-ahead was given, fueling is set to begin in the next couple of minutes here. Now T minus 35 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. While the liftoff winds are certainly not going to be an impediment to a launch this morning, they do bounce our cameras around just a little bit when it comes to our super zoomed in view here. The reason we're taking you closer to the base of the Falcon 9 rocket right now is to talk about what we're going to be watching for as fueling gets underway, assuming we don't hear from SpaceX on the start of prop load. Even though this booster is flying for a record 24th time today, you can still make out the SpaceX lettering pretty well right now. May have cleared off some of the sootiness around the lettering. What we're going to be watching for, actually just beyond that tree branch that keeps bobbing in front of the X in SpaceX, if you'll notice, there's a slightly different gradient just beneath the X there. Right at that point is where we should start to see a bit of a frost line form as the supercold densified liquid oxygen starts flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage tanks. Now we're at T-minus 34 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. Assuming SpaceX is in fact targeting 5:13 liftoff as they currently appear to be, we should start seeing evidence of that fueling coming up in the next, I should say, minute and a half to 2 minutes, give or take. So again, we're looking for that frost line to start forming there just beneath the X and the SpaceX lettering. And we should see a little vapor as well. It's a bit chilly here by Florida standards, but certainly nowhere near as cold as the super densified cold liquid oxygen that's going to be flowing on there. So the difference in temperature and humidity will allow us to hopefully see a little bit of vapor form as the frost line begins to fill. Currently 48 degrees here Fahrenheit on Florida's Space Coast here at Cape Canaveral. Just about as chilly as it's going to get tonight, thankfully. This is about as cold as it's going to get here for quite some time, looks like, just taking a look at the multi-day outlook. And again, I say these things about quote-unquote cold weather with the caveat of knowing that folks in the Midwest and in the North are experiencing truly bone-chilling cold temperatures. So, as someone who's spent multiple winters in Chicago, I certainly empathize with a proper chilly winter. This is just chilly by Florida standards. Now, T-minus 32 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. Looks like we're starting to see that vapor form, a little bit of the frost line build up, which does suggest that SpaceX is tanking its Falcon 9 rocket, which means that they are locking in a launch attempt at least at 5:13 a.m. Eastern, 10:13 UTC for those joining around the world. Because SpaceX is now fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, again, they are, when I say locking in, that means that they are committing to that time during today's launch window. Because SpaceX uses they call load and go style of fueling, they tank the Falcon 9 pretty close to the point at which they are ready to launch the vehicle. And so if for whatever reason there's a technical hiccup between now and T0, SpaceX will have to scrub the launch attempt and pivot to a 24-hour backup opportunity. It's not anticipated, but certainly there's always the possibility. So we'll continue to keep our eyes open for any developments as we continue on through the countdown. But so far it's been what appears to be a smooth count. Now 31 minutes, 6 seconds prior to liftoff. Now T-minus 29 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. Taking a look at our live chat, I want to thank the little more than 1,200 of you who are joining with us live this morning. If you haven't already, you could do us a big solid by clicking the like button, allowing some more folks to find their way into our live launch coverage as we continue on through the countdown process. As this booster B1067 is getting ready to make its 24th launch today, a record for SpaceX and for spaceflight in general. It, of course, has quite a resume under its belt. So with our time before the so-called big vent, let's go ahead and take a stroll down memory lane, wind the clock back, and let you know where this booster has been as we prepare for where it's about to go. First flew back on June 3rd of 2021 with SpaceX's 22nd Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS-22 mission. This is a cargo Dragon flight to the International Space Station. Its next mission, also a Dragon spacecraft, but of the crewed variety, supporting the quartet of astronauts on the Crew 3 mission, flying aboard Crew Dragon named Endurance, lifting off on November 11th. Next up was a communications satellite, Turksat 5B, lifting off on December 19th of 2021. Moving on to the next year, Crew 4 was the next astronaut group to fly aboard this booster, and the last, in fact. That was on board Crew Dragon Freedom, the most recent booster to enter the fleet so far. That lifted off on April 27th of 2022. That was followed up by one more trip to the International Space Station, CRS-25, lifting off on July 14th of that year. You'll notice all those missions to the International Space Station involved drone ship landings. Of course, now SpaceX performs RTLS, or return to landing site, booster landings for missions heading up to the orbiting outpost. Next up was the first Starlink mission for this booster, Starlink 4-34 on September 19th of 2022. That was followed up by the Hotbird 13G satellite mission, communications satellite for Eutelsat. That was followed up by O3B mPOWER satellites 1 and 2. Then a series of Starlink missions. You had Starlink 5-2 on January 26th, 5-5 on March 24th, and 5-9 on May 14th. That was followed up on June 18th of last year by the Satria satellite mission for the Indonesian satellite company PSN. Next up, we're back to Starlinks for a little bit here. Starlink 6-10 on August 17th, 6-22 on October 13th, 6-29 on November 22nd, and 6-35 on January 7th coming into this year. Different kind of communication sat, Telkomsat Meraputa, lifting off on February 20th. Then back to Starlinks we go for a good piece here. 6-45 on March 31st, 6-55 on May 3rd, 8-5 on June 5th, and 8-3 on August 10th. Then a pair of satellites for the Galileo constellation for the European Commission. Galileo satellites FM26 and FM32, lifting off on September 18th. That was followed by the KoreaSat 6A mission. And that leads us to today, with the latest batch of Starlink satellites getting ready to lift off on the Starlink 6-70 mission, T-minus 24 minutes and 46 seconds. T-minus 24 minutes, 6 seconds and counting, seeing that frost line continue to form on the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Propellant load moving along quite nicely this morning. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank one of our wonderful channel members, Space Pony, for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships today. Really appreciate that, Space Pony. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard to all of you. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Space Pony in the live chat, and we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. After this morning's launch, if you're looking for some more updates in the realm of spaceflight, yesterday evening we did upload our latest video, a conversation with part of the leadership of the astronaut office at the Johnson Space Center. NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik and I talked about some of the astronaut influence over various pieces of the Artemis architecture that video up right now on the channel, that full interview. So you can go ahead and check that out at your convenience. We're now T-minus 22 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. Go ahead and throw a link to that video here in the live chat, just to make it a little more convenient for folks. As we await the start of the so-called big vent, I want to just briefly touch on the payload on board this mission today. 24 Starlink satellites in total. Again, this marking the 84th Starlink launch of the year. Each of these satellites clocks in about 1,760 pounds, or about 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet, or 30 meters. They use argon hull thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43-degree inclination. Now T-minus 20 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. The chill down of the feed lines has begun, and we'll see that evidenced in less than 20 seconds now at the start of the so-called big vent. And there you see the vent getting underway now. Liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket anticipated in just a hair more than 20 minutes. As we are tracking not only this flight but other happenings on the orbital space front, we have an update from the Indian Space Research Organization within the last few minutes here, and I'll quote them. Quote, due to an anomaly detected in the Proba 3 spacecraft, PSLV C-59/Proba 3 mission launch rescheduled to tomorrow at 16:12 hours. It's, of course, local time there in India. So one orbital launch taken off the docket from today, pivoting to a backup opportunity tomorrow due to, again, and I'll quote them, a, quote, anomaly detected in the Proba 3 spacecraft. So by all accounts there, the launch vehicle, the rocket itself, is in good health. No specifics shared by ISRO on exactly what the anomaly was. Perhaps we'll learn more from the European Space Agency, since the pair of spacecraft that are the mission payload is coming from them. Now T-minus 15 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. The big vent has concluded. Second stage liquid oxygen load is now underway. Now T-minus 14 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. We talked about the countdown timeline before fueling began, of course. Let's go ahead and take a moment and step through the launch timeline sequence of events that we're expecting in a nominal flight scenario with this Falcon flight. Following liftoff in 14 minutes and 24 seconds, Falcon 9 will begin to throttle down its engines in anticipation of passing through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, at about T plus 1 minute and 10 seconds. There will be a sequence of a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds, followed a few seconds thereafter by stage separation, and then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on the Falcon 9's second stage, T plus 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Payload fairings will be jettisoned just before the 3-minute mark. The Falcon 9 booster's entry burn set to begin in T plus 6 minutes and 4 seconds, with the burn lasting 21 seconds in duration, setting up for the landing burn to begin at T plus 7 minutes and 51 seconds, with a touchdown on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, T plus 8 minutes and 13 seconds. The recovery vessel Doug is on standby to scoop up the fairing halves as well. Following the conclusion of the burn of the Merlin vacuum engine, Falcon 9 rocket will enter into a coast phase until T plus 53 minutes and 56 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn setting up Starlink satellite deployment at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 5 seconds. Now T-minus 11 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. This morning's Falcon 9 rocket, still feels like tonight, set to be the 120th Falcon 9 flight for SpaceX in 2024. So before it launches, let's go ahead and talk about the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX, Falcon 9, which stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that, of course, is made up by the Falcon booster, the first stage. This booster, B-1067, has flown 23 times before, going for launch number 24 today. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage booster on the drone ship. Again, today they are using a short fall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the Falcon 9's second stage and a first stage main engine cutoff. High-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until that point of stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 24 Starlink V2 mini satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1 and LOX, same as the first stage. Following deployment of those Starlink satellites, it will ignite for a third time in order to perform a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up and help to eliminate the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this flight. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, which are currently encapsulating the 24 Starlink satellites. Fairings are made up of a carbon composite material that stand 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 fairing halves will be recovered downrange from where the first stage booster lands on the drone ship. And again, they will be using the recovery vessel Doug to scoop them up and bring them back to Port Canaveral, refurbish them, and turn them around for future flights. Now currently T-minus 7 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. Appreciate the 3,700 of you who are now joining with us live. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage, as we are now just minutes away from the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket and coming up with the point of the engine chill down sequence here on the next 12 seconds or so. Since more people have found their way into the coverage at this point since the last time we brought this up, let's go ahead and just quickly step back through the launch trajectory of this mission. Let you know where this Falcon 9 is going to head once it leaves the pad. Flight path of Starlink 6-70 will take this Falcon 9 rocket on a southeasterly trajectory once it leaves Florida's Space Coast. First stage booster will then separate from the second stage and touch down on the SpaceX drone ship called a short fall of gravitas. This booster landing, if successful, will be the 88th successful booster landing on a short fall of gravitas, also set to be the 299th booster landing on a drone ship and the 378th booster landing to date. Now T-minus 6 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Now T-minus 4 minutes, 31 seconds and counting.
String back, recheck is started.
Those additional noises you're hearing now are mission audio from SpaceX as we're getting our pad views here of the Falcon 9 rocket at Space Launch Complex 40. As you just heard, they're preparing for the retract of the strong back here. You can see the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings are opening up, and that transporter erector, or the strong back, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. As a quick bit of housekeeping here, you'll notice the discrepancy between the countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen versus what's in the big box. Our clock is in real time, and what's coming in from SpaceX is coming on a slight delay. So while we have our tracking cameras trained on the Falcon 9 rocket, we'll be making our callouts in real time and then pivot to the SpaceX time once we're relying solely on their onboard cameras. Pad 40, of course, set to be quite busy for SpaceX in the upcoming year. SpaceX founder Elon Musk has put forth a goal of 150 Falcon 9 missions, or 150 orbital flights.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Certainly quite a few of them, if not the lion's share, will happen from this pad. You heard that stage 1 LOX load is complete, just waiting for the same call on the second stage, and then this Falcon 9 will be fully fueled. Less than 2 minutes to lift off.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And with that call, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. That venting you're seeing here are the ground gas closeouts. Now less than a minute and a half to go.
Ground gas closeouts.
Now less than a minute to go.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
With that call, we're just waiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch here. Should be coming up in the next 5-ish seconds.
LD go for launch.
And with that call that the SpaceX launch director is go for launch, we are now just 30 seconds away from the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. "15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 6-70 mission. The Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Now a little more than a minute into flight. A good liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. Should be throttling down here, heading into max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Good call for max Q. Heading into a few different events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds, followed by stage separation, then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine. Next, we should be hearing the call for MVAC engine chill.
MVAC chill.
Good call. Great work from our tracking team today. Coming up on Miko here. See Miko. Stage separation. Second stage engine start.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
There you see those hypersonic grid fins deploying on the Falcon booster as the payload fairings have separated.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Good call, good visuals from the Falcon 9's onboard cameras.
Nominal trajectories.
Now T plus 3 minutes, 45 seconds and counting into the mission. Coming up, the next milestone will be the start of the first stage entry burn at about T plus 6 minutes and 4 seconds. It's a very clear night here on Florida's Space Coast, so there's a decent chance that we should be able to catch the entry burn with our tracking cameras. It's not always a perfect undertaking, so we will do our level best, and if we are able to bring those ground level views of the entry burn to you, we certainly will do so. Right now we're continuing to watch the burn of the Merlin vacuum engine as it continues on with its first burn in the mission. Seeing SpaceX toggle from one side to the other of that Merlin vacuum engine, and the onboard camera view in the bottom right-hand corner box on your screen here. Just one piece of data that SpaceX uses to make sure that the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket is performing as expected. Seeing the sunrise there just behind the hypersonic grid fin on the onboard camera of the Falcon booster. Again, this booster is aiming for a touchdown on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. That'll happen just after the 8-minute mark if all is successful.
Stage 1 entry burn started.
Hear the
Stage
call for the
1
entry
FTS
burn, and we've got
staged.
that view here from Pete Carson's with Max Q Productions. Well done, Pete. There's the conclusion of that entry burn right there. Still seeing it in a slight delay from the SpaceX camera.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
With the conclusion of that 3-engine entry burn, we are now looking towards the single engine ignition coming up at about T plus 7 minutes and
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
51 seconds for the start of that landing burn. That call you just heard, the flight termination system on the Falcon 9's second stage, no longer needed at this stage in flight.
Stage 1 transonic. Stage 1 landing burn.
Good call for the start of
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
a landing burn. We should see drone ship level of views coming up momentarily.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And with that, booster B1067 has made its record-breaking 24th booster landing.
MVAC shutdown.
Now T plus 9 minutes, 24 seconds, and counting into this mission. With the Merlin vacuum engine concluding its first burn, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket now in a coast phase until T plus 53 minutes, 56 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn of that Merlin vacuum engine to help circularize the orbit ahead of the deployment of the Starlink satellites at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes. And 5 seconds. So far, a good beginning to this very busy orbital activity Wednesday we have here. A good launch from China, a launch from here in the United States. And of course, as we reported earlier on in the broadcast, a delay of the mission from India due to an issue with the Probe 3 spacecraft. That mission now set to lift off tomorrow, which means the next launch of the day will now become the return to flight mission for Vega C, launching the Sentinel-1C Earth observing satellite with a liftoff from Europe's spaceport in Kourou, French Guiana at 4:20 p.m. Eastern, 21:20 UTC. before we go ahead and pivot to our mission stats that currently stand, do want to thank Patty Chichil. He's been a member with us for 5 months now, saying thank you Spaceflight Now and mods for the best coverage. Appreciate that, Patty. And with that, let's go ahead and begin to wind down our coverage of this mission with a look at the mission stats as they currently stand. With a good touchdown of the first stage booster, that marked the 24th mission now in the books for the flight leader for SpaceX B-1067. This was SpaceX's 405th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 120th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. This was the 349th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This is SpaceX's 122nd orbital launch of 2024, including 2 Falcon Heavy missions. This was the actually 129th orbital launch within the last 365 days. This was SpaceX's 221st orbital launch from Pad 40 and the 275th overall orbital launch from this pad. Taking a look at the bar chart version of the Falcon family of rockets, here's where SpaceX currently stands. Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 88th landing of a booster successfully on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas, marking SpaceX's 299th successful drone ship landing and the 278th overall booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 86th orbital launch from Florida, the 128th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 141st orbital launch from U.S. rocket company, and the 232nd orbital launch from around the globe. 6 orbital launch failures on the year. Here's where the pie chart now stands, with the U.S. continuing to hold 61% of the pie. China, with its now 61 missions on the year, has 26%, and Russia, with its 15, has 6% of the pie. As far as the next Falcon 9 rocket set to launch, we're, of course, tracking the Starlink 9-14 mission, which appears to be going towards the end of the window available to them today, lifting off from Vandenberg Space Force Base. So don't be overly surprised if we hear another launch date slip for that mission. Also unclear if SpaceX is going to continue the pattern that they've exhibited for the last 2 Vandenberg missions, which is not advertising launch viewing live for the mission and then popping up with a stream post liftoff. So unclear what the outlook on that is going to be, which of course will help dictate if we're able to cover the launch live with you as we normally have been with our coverage for Vandenberg missions. So stay tuned, launch fans. We'll keep you posted throughout the day. Be sure to head over to the launch schedule tab on spaceflightnow.com for the very latest for orbital launch times and dates. Want to thank our wonderful moderators here in the live chat, have been helping us out today. Aussie Space Girl and Callisti Lee. Y'all are both fabulous. Appreciate you as always. Big thanks, broadly speaking, to our channel member community for supporting what we do day after day here at Spaceflight Now. You are what makes this all possible. So we appreciate your ongoing membership here on YouTube. Want to thank our friend Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions for his help with tracking this Falcon 9 rocket today. You can see the transporter erector is now back up right there at the pad. It's part of SpaceX's process of turning around Slick 40 as quickly as possible for future missions. Also want to thank our photographer Adam Bernstein for tracking the rocket. Look forward to seeing his photography from liftoff, and you can find his and Michael's work over on their handles on X, ABurnNYC, MD Kane Jr. Be sure to follow Spaceflight now at X, as well as Blue Sky and Threads and Facebook. Also want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast, and remiss for not mentioning this at the top of the broadcast, but I'll mention this on our way out the digital door, marking 25 years of continuous space coverage with Spaceflight Now. So big tip of the hat to our Spaceflight Now leader, Stephen Young, for all his hard work, and our colleagues who have come and gone over the years. It is an honor and a privilege to be a part of this news organization during this chapter of spaceflight, where things have never been busier. And the most important piece of all of that is you, for wherever you are watching from or reading the work that we publish at spaceflightnow.com now, in the past, and hopefully in the future. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.